Welcome back, Vinyl Community. Reggae Spotlight time again. Today looking at Keith Douglas and the group called Foundation. Ooh yeah. Voice of Keith Douglas in the lead. One shirt on my back, but life goes on. It's from an album called One Shirt by Foundation, released around 1995-1996 on Island, Jamaica. Part of Island Records' renewed interest in reggae at the time, after having broken the Harder They Come soundtrack, Bob Marley and the Wailers, Toots and the Maytals, and many others in the 1970s, and bringing reggae to a wider international audience. By the 1980s, the roots reggae and roots harmony tradition that Foundation were in had kind of fallen out of favor. Jamaica itself went in the dance hall direction. By the late 80s, DJs like Shabba Ranks and Chaka Demus and Pliers and others were at the top of the heap. So Foundation were kind of out of step with the times. Their story actually goes back to the birth of Keith Douglas in 1952. Began singing around 1966. Began entering song festival competitions around his native St. Mary and surrounding areas. Finally winning in the late 60s in St. Mary and the town of Portland. Did not win in Kingston. Ended up auditioning for sound system owner and producer Jack Ruby, who told him that he needed to flesh out his sound with some harmonies. Jack Ruby was based on the north coast of Jamaica. He would produce Burning Spear's seminal Marcus Garvey album, as well as albums by Justin Hines and the Dominoes and many others. There's a great compilation of his productions called Black Foundation, which appeared on Heartbeat Records. There's Jack there on the cover. The core of Jack Ruby's very horn-drenched roots reggae sound was a band of session players he called the Black Disciples, which were anchored around the drums of Leroy Horsemouth Wallace and Robbie Shakespeare on bass. Wallace was the star of the film Rockers, and Jack Ruby actually appears in the film as well, playing himself. So the Black Disciples, there's a killer instrumental on this compilation called Free Rhodesia, where he rhymes off all the names of the players in the intro. I'll put a link to that in the comments. Always forget to mention the music links in the comments. Keith Douglas would audition for Jack Ruby, told him to come back with some harmonies to back up his vocals. Keith Douglas finally, eventually changed his name to Keith Douglas, who was born Errol Douglas, as people were confusing him with Errol Dunkley, another singer. The name sounded kind of similar. Came back with a lineup of Houston Ipal Thomas and Emilio Pupa Smiley on harmonies. Auditioned a song called Barriers for Jack Ruby, and you can actually see that audition clip on YouTube. It's a little piece of history captured on film there. I'll put a link to that down below as well. Ruby was so impressed that he took that song to Chris Blackwell of Island Records, who commissioned the group, now called Foundation, to record their debut album called Flames, which was released in 1988. Co-produced by Jack Ruby and Stephen Cat Coor of the Third World Band, with musical backing by some of the top reggae players like Robbie Shakespeare from the Black Disciples band of years before, the 1970s. By the late 1980s, as I said, that roots harmony tradition had kind of fallen out of favor. The Foundation albums had a more updated sound for the times, but definitely socially conscious lyrics in the roots harmony tradition going back to the late 60s and the 1970s. So on the strength of that debut album, Foundation were able to tour the US and Europe, came out with a second album called Heart Feel It. Unfortunately, in 1989, their producer, Jack Ruby, passed away suddenly of a heart attack, which left the group kind of in limbo, and nothing more would be heard from them until that third album, One Shirt, appeared in 1995. I guess more or less a self-production. Definitely a more mature, kind of reflective sound. I'll play some clips for you. A track called Set the People Free. Recently picked up those first two albums on vinyl. Flames. Still got a price sticker from Black Swan Records, $4.95. It's a store used to be in Vancouver, down near the university. I was only ever there once or twice, long since closed down. Heart Feel It. Set the People Free. Next tune, Universal Unrest. Following these albums, not much would be heard from Foundation. They toured again in 1999, the US. But following that, Pupa Smiley immigrated to the US. And IPAL passed away from cancer in 2001. It's a universal unrest all over the world. Deeply socially conscious lyrics in the roots harmony tradition. Following those events, Keith Douglas would be left to soldier on alone in music, performing live, working on his singing and songwriting. Nothing more would be heard from him until actually just recently. He has put out a new album, first time in 20 years, over 20 years. Album produced by Guillaume Bougard of the Taboo One label in France. I've just picked this up, hence this video. Album called Hi Yo. Another feature of this album is reunion of some of the surviving members of the Black Disciples band. So you've got Robbie Shakespeare on bass, Earl Chenna Smith on guitar, Horsemouth Wallace on drums, Robbie Lynn on keys. There they are. Guillaume Bougard's producer. He's done quite a bit of work. He's very close with Sly and Robbie. Worked with them another number of times. He's in some of the groups, the reggae groups I'm in online. So he's around. So I've just picked this up. Haven't even listened to all of this yet, but I can tell this is going to be one of my top albums of the year. Absolutely wonderful. I'll put some links from it in the comments below. Keith Douglas, after all these years, sounding in fine form. Black Disciples band. Still got it. If you buy this album on Bandcamp, as I did, postage was expensive, actually more than the cost of the LP, but you get the download with bonus instrumental tracks. Only 6 tracks on here, all extended though, disco mix style, 7-8 minute tracks, but the download includes all the instrumental versions, which ends up being like an hour and a half worth of music. So definitely works out to value for dollars in the end. But a wonderful album. I haven't even listened to all of this yet. Going to be on my top 10 list of new albums of the year for sure. Wonderful to hear the voice of Keith Douglas and Foundation again after so many years. It's kind of funny. Foundation are one of those groups that existed in this little blip of time when Island Records had that renewed interest in roots reggae. There were a couple other groups that came with that they put out an album or two, then were never heard from again, and became forgotten by all but whoever were buying their records that time and is still around. Even myself listened to those at the time, filed them away. Kind of had it in my head that those records had a bit of a dated sound of the time, but I've been inspired by a friend of mine on Instagram who posted one of their records recently. I've been pulling them out and listening to them again, and really enjoying them. Much better than I remembered. And then, of course, I heard the news that that new album had been released, so I had to pick that up. So we're going to close out with my look at Keith Douglas and Foundation. Universal Unrest. Hope you've enjoyed, guys. Peace.